My motivation for founding Mindport was my vision for virtual reality. If you look at the technology, it's really powerful. It can solve so many problems, but it's used for only a really, really small section of this. And if you think about why this is the case, the problem is that those who actually have the problem don't know how to solve it with virtual reality, or that you even can use it for that. My favorite example is a use case implemented in the early 90s because someone solved a really important problem, and this is treating patients with severe burn wounds. So what you do is you give really strong painkillers. And what this person did is basically he just put a VR headset on the people's face while they were being treated, and the perceived pain went down by a huge factor. So he had 4 different metrics, and in some by 90%, by others only by 50%. But it was really a huge impact, which was better than basically the painkillers.
Welcome to a new episode of the Mind Echo podcast, where we explore the stories, ideas, and mindsets of entrepreneurs shaping industries in Germany. And today I'm really excited to welcome David Lähner, founder and CEO of Mindport, which is a Bonn-based startup on a mission to democratize immersive experiences through its no-code toolkit for quick and easy creation of VR or virtual reality apps called VR Builder. So David grew up in Solingen and studied computer science at the University of Bonn, in which he graduated with a distinction there. And early in his career, he worked as an IT consultant and later as a business analyst at the company Allianz, in which he gained first-hand insights into how large enterprises operate. And from there, he, instead of pursuing a traditional developer's path, he gravitated toward product management, consulting roles that allow him to create impact at the intersection of technology and business. So his real entry into the world, though, of virtual reality came when he joined InnoActive in Munich, where he helped enterprises adopt VR for training and also had a chance to support on the launch of new products like InnoActive Creator and Portal. And following this stage at his career, David decided to take a bold leap, founding his own venture. So in 2021, he launched Mindport, driven by the belief that VR's potential was far greater than gaming. He saw that industries like, for example, medicine and training needed tools to create immersive content, but actually lack accessible ways to do that. So with VR Builder, Mindport enables both developers but also non-developers to build VR applications without coding, making immersive learning and training more affordable and scalable. And beyond technology, one other thing that I appreciate when I got to know David was that he's also experimenting with new ways of running a company. So Mindport is fully remote. It's guided by values of fairness, honesty, and transparency. And what I also found interesting, and we will dive later into that in the episode, is that David and team pursue modern management principles, like, for example, giving employees voting rights on decisions and making salaries and finances transparent, which for me shows really alternative ways on how startups and companies can be managed. So, David, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. And an awesome introduction. I think no one so far had such a detailed and absolutely correct introduction so far. You did a great job there.
Great. I'm happy that captured all the facts in the right way. Great. So I would say let's dive into our conversation for today's episode. And what I'm always asking at the beginning of the conversations is just to understand a bit better what's on your mind lately, what's been on your mind this week, what have you been reflecting on inside or outside of work?
That's a good question. I'm currently quite busy, so my mind is very occupied. I have a final presentation on Monday for one of our research projects, and currently we have 4 in parallel, and they basically take all my capacity. Mm-hmm. And as soon as this and the other one is going to be finished in September, as soon as those are done, I have more time to think about more stuff. Mm-hmm. So right now, full capacity on those 4 research projects running in parallel with deadlines approaching.
Okay, and that's the art ultimately when you're dealing with a startup. We discussed upfront that you have the team, but also you're leading this, let's say, as the founder, as the lead in the company. But we will dive in a second how you're actually collaborated within the team. But at the end, comparing where you're coming from to having now started your startup, that's ultimately you need to be really multitasking and dealing with all of these projects and switching back and forth between different teams, right?
Yeah. There are many hats that I'm wearing. In addition to those research projects, I also have to work with clients, handle the team, work on the product, etc.
All right. No, thanks for sharing that. But Let's dive maybe into what's happening on the business side, projects and so on in a second. It's always interesting to look all the way back into your background, how you shape yourself, where you're coming from. So going all the way to the start of your career life, looking back at your childhood in Solingen, what are some of your earliest memories that you think shaped how you see the world today?
Yeah, I think you already brought up that my journey was not totally straightforward, right? It's not that you see, okay, there's a straight path. I did lots of turns, and I think I also like doing that in this way. So I try out things, I'm curious, and I'm not planning for a concrete destination, but I'm mostly trying to enjoy the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take this approach and then you take a perspective and look back, then sometimes you notice what you did and understand in retrospect what this was about. And yeah, I also thought about being a founder, becoming a founder, what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so when talking about my childhood, so my parents both were not entrepreneurs. For me, that was not really something conscious to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But in my family, they were entrepreneurs. And one thing I think that shaped my view on entrepreneurship was one of my family members. He was running his company. And when I basically finished school, I noticed a struggle. So there was a big crash, and his company was struggling a lot. And I noticed that this also impacted the personal well-being. So for me, entrepreneurship was always extremely risky. And from what I got from my parents, this never was really on my mind, right? I always was curious. I always thought, well, someday I might do this. I'm curious, but it's not something that I pursued. But on the other side, in some way, I always was some kind of entrepreneur. Because when I think it was still in kindergarten or in elementary school, I kind of created my first startup, I can say.
Okay,
So
all right.
my friends living next door, we had this idea. And yeah, you probably know these things, those small, colorful squares, right?
Yeah,
And you can
right.
write notes, right? And I noticed, hey, if you just fold them, you have small envelopes. And you could put small things in there and send them, right? And I thought, this is an awesome idea. And my friends thought, hey, great idea, let's do this. So what we did there was, first we went into mass production. So we produced hundreds of these things, and then we tried selling them. And this totally failed. So we sold two, both of them to his father. Yeah. So, and yeah, I think that's also already a learning, right? Because
Definitely.
first you should understand the market and see if there's a need before starting mass production. And so I did some of those little entrepreneurial experiments when I was young, but it was just a hobby or
And
a
most,
side gig.
and
Right?
sorry to interrupt, most likely unconsciously, right?
Yeah, it was something. Hey, what do you do today? Hey, how about this? And then we started mass production.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is if you also do it with some friends on the side, it's kind of like a fun project to do. But I mean, unconsciously, you are definitely gaining the exposure to this kind of way of thinking and process, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is what people call the founder's gene. So all the founders have something like that, right? If you ask a founder, usually they come up with a story like that. And I think this is not in all people. So yes, some just like creating stuff and also like creating business.
Yeah, I know. I agree, and I see indeed that pattern when I look into some of the former stories. I fully agree from other people also having their own ventures. And maybe just to also, I'm not sure if there is an easy connection to dots of that time of your life and what you're doing right now, but did you had or you had quite interest on technology back then? Was there something to bridge that in the future you would be working on the kind of topic you're working right now?
Yeah, two things. So the first one is the business that I created, it was not a lemonade stand, right? It was not something where I just applied a working business model. There was some kind of innovations. This was new, right? There were no envelopes in this small and colorful way, right? So it was really a new innovative product that I put on the market, and the market was not ready back then. And I also started coding at age 10 or something like that. I did a lot of coding, and I always coded some games, right? So there was always an interest in technology and also in building products.
Okay, and that interest in coding, that's something that just naturally as a hobby came to you, and then you just started to explore that on your own.
In school, I was always good at maths. And then I'm not sure where this actually came from. I think it was some friend of my mother's, and her daughter was attending those coding sessions in the holidays. And this is how I got into coding. So it was in Germany we have 6 weeks of holidays and during summer, right? And it's annoying for the parents if the kids are all around. So you try to keep them busy, and there was some kind of boot camp, and then you can send your kids. And during the day, we solved math problems via coding, and in the night, we basically had our LAN parties. So we were always tired and ate lots of chips. So this is how I got into coding, I would say. Once you learn that and you see you can really create something with your bare hands, right? And you just have to explain this machine what it should do, and it listens. If you talk in the right way to it, it's like magic. You can create something from nothing by just thinking about it. And I think this is really amazing.
Fully agree. And I mean, you grew up back then doing it by yourself. Nowadays, people that have, and I can put myself in that no background or experience in coding. I was just using the latest version of ChatGPT and then see how all that code is written. I mean, of course, we have now these enabling hands that allow us see how you can talk to an assistant and then something could be created out of that. But even when you started back then, I can definitely understand this feeling that it was triggering. But I mean, maybe rounding that up and going to the next step. So then I can see the thread or the connection why you took the decision then to go in a career of computer science at Bonn, right? Maybe you can explain a bit how that thought process went and how that developed back on that time.
That again was something like it just happened. It was not that of a conscious decision. So for me, as mentioned, I was always good at math in school. So I was really early, and when I was young, I knew I will study mathematics, and there was never a question or doubt about it. And for better or worse, even at a young age, I knew that that you don't need any good grades to start mathematics. And this also decreased my external motivation to get good grades in school. So I always try to do the bare minimum and do other stuff on the side instead. Usually things that I enjoyed and I had fun with. But yeah, I did not have that good grades in school.
Okay.
And I think this was part of it because I did not see the need for it. And yeah, then I started studying mathematics, and a friend of school, he joined the same university, and he said, "Hey, you need a side subject, right? Secondary." And computer science is pretty good because they overlap each other. So just do both at the same time, and you basically get the pre-diploma for free. So I thought, well, if he does it, I do it too, right? That's why I started computer science. Studying it. And while doing this, I noticed something interesting because in mathematics, there were also some kind of practical mathematics where they used computer and started coding to solve the mathematical problems. And I liked that more than doing the theoretical part. But actually in computer science, they used very complex, also algebraic algorithms to solve problems, but with a purpose. And this is why I then basically switched to computer science and did computer graphics, because there you had those working with large tensors, for instance, to solve complex problems, to optimize, and then get really high quality visual effects out of this.
Right.
So and in my final thesis, I worked on an algorithm working with a sparse voxel octree to optimize the performance and do photorealistic rendering on the GPU. There were really tough mathematical questions to answer and problems to solve. But once I did it was not for the sake of solving a math problem, but for the sake of getting a really nice picture out of this.
Right.
I think this is much more motivating, at least for me, if you really see that it has value and it creates impact and you can directly see the fruits of your labor.
All right. No, thanks for sharing, elaborating. And I think, again, you most likely strengthen in this journey as well certain thought processes or approaches or even skills from your side that serve you well as where you are right now. But also trying to understand, and that's kind of like the next phase before diving into Mindport. Maybe you can walk us through a bit on the previous steps you took before starting the company. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so I know that you work as an IT consultant. What attracted you then, following your studies, to consulting instead of doing, I mean, but please correct me if I'm wrong, kind of pure software development?
Yeah, again, not a clear plan, I would say. So it was again a lot of opportunities, and I just took those opportunities. So what I was wondering is, do I want to become a programmer? Because I enjoy coding and I like programming, but I think the fun reduces if you have to do something for 40 hours a week. Right, if you are
Right.
forced to do this. And I wasn't sure if this is really the right way to go for me. And this is why I also took this very hard topic in my final thesis. And I said, hey, I just want to understand now, is this something for me or not?
Mm-hmm.
So I went all in. And it also took a little bit longer than usual. I took, I think, even over a year to finish my thesis. But after that, I was sure, okay, I don't want to become a programmer or a software developer. And I did not know what else to do with my computer science degree.
Right.
And yeah, then this opportunity came up. So for some reason, I was then invited to this IT consultancy in Munich, and they had those recruitment days.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was not, hey, I want to apply for this job because I want to have this job. I said, hey, this is interesting. I will go there. I can visit Munich. They even pay this, and I get a free recruiting training, basically, in the worst case. So why not do it, right? So I went there, and then there was several candidates, and we had to solve those problems together. And it went all well, and the people were nice, and in the end, they made an offer. And since I was very busy with my final thesis, I wasn't applying for many job opportunities.
Right.
So it kind of, I don't want to say it was the only one, but it was a very good one. And from the options that I had, it looked like also a useful way for me because it gives me the chance to look into many different areas, into many different clients and businesses. So I thought, well, if I don't know what I want to do, I only know I don't want to become a coder, then here I have the chance to really get an understanding of what else I can do with my skills.
Mm-hmm.
And this went really well, right? Because I was there for 3 years. I had 3 different clients. I did 3 very different projects. I learned about IT architecture and project management and requirements engineering. And we also did a lot of certifications. So I also really gained many different skills that I now can use.
Mm-hmm.
And I also understood enterprises, which helps me now.
Right. And then you transitioned from that into what was your experience at Allianz. And maybe you can elaborate a bit what kind of discovery or learning you did while working on such a kind of enterprise level then.
Yeah, that again was also something more like an opportunity. And I personally was surprised that I end up in an insurance company because I'm not the kind of guy conservative or anything like that. So a headhunter came to me and well basically had this job position that he had to fill and my profile fitted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did the interviews and again everything was nice and it was the right time for me to take a new role. One of the main motivations was I was a consultant, right? And I always was consulting other people in the enterprise. And everything moves so slowly. And I was young, so people usually don't listen to me, right? Even though I might be right or not. And so what I did not like as a consultant, especially as a junior, that I had very little impact.
Right.
And you only could influence the decisions, you couldn't make them. And this was what I liked about basically switching to an internal position, that I got this new responsibilities where I have a bigger influence.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what was one of the main drivers for me to go to this company. And even though it was a conservative, they explained, yes, Allianz is conservative, but they want to be more innovative and they want
Right.
to shake things up. And I was not the only hire to fill in one person who just retired or something. They created a new entity
Mm-hmm.
and they had something like 10 new people and they were all driven and motivated. And so this was why I gave this a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out really well because I, again, learned a lot about enterprises. I better understood why things are moving slowly. I also understood what you have to do to actually get things into motion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to head to the next station. At this time, I basically fell in love with virtual reality. So I was doing a lot of virtual reality, not hobby projects, but I used the freedom that I had there to push virtual reality technology at Allianz forward.
Okay, so you already started at that stage.
Yes. Is correct. And I did the workshops, for instance. At that time, there was the Google Cardboard was one of the modern technologies, right? So I made a cardboard app, and so all my colleagues could bring their smartphones, just put on my app, put it into a cardboard. Then got like, I don't know how many, 20 or so cardboard boxes, and then we could just put it on and look around. So it was a nice new experience for my colleagues there. And I gave some presentations and explained why this topic is important. And I explained about the future of the internet, why we should, yes, Allianz should work with this new technology so that we are not again too late, like with the mobile phones.
Right.
And people were listening, they were nodding, they were understanding, but no one was willing to pay something or giving budget for this topic already. And so I thought, well, maybe I come back later. Yeah, so that's basically how I went on. So this is now maybe the first time that I made this conscious decision where I said, hey, I want to now work at a startup. I was also exploring startups at Allianz, so they also have their own incubator and accelerator.
Right.
So I was doing some dry runs, let's say, in this safe area on the weekends. But for me, it was clear, hey, I want to move faster. So startup, and I love this technology. So something with extended reality, at least. Yeah, that's basically how I ended up in InnoActive because it's checked all my boxes. And yeah, but maybe by coincidence, but one of my former colleagues from the IT consultancy was working at InnoActive, and he was looking for a product manager at the time. Again, maybe opportunities, but a little bit more directed in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite interesting there is a breadth of different listeners. And I think the thread that you get from how you've grown, I mean, I think you were really directed from where you were really interested in and trying to take the opportunities as they were coming and grow from these opportunities as you were moving forward, to the point that you kind of found yourself, like you mentioned, these first experiences through Allianz, and then you kind of started to steer more consciously from there. So
exactly.
And that's quite good, because sometimes I think you speak and there are some people that say either from day one exactly what's the path, but I think it's the ocean of opportunities and things you can do and grow, and especially from your own personality. I mean, it's really tough, and you can only probably land to that decision as you try, taste, and learn from different experiences, right?
Absolutely. And what I find surprising is if you take the backwards perspective, right? Everything makes sense. But
it does, yeah.
When I was in there, I did not have a clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
But the pieces fall together, and at some point you take a step back and you see the full picture, and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. In 2021, and let's now jump into Mindport. You founded Mindport. Can you maybe take us back to those first days? What were you from day one? What was the problem you were determined to solve with the people now you're working? How does this journey look like?
So yeah, my motivation for founding Mindport was, as you already mentioned in the introduction, my vision for virtual reality. Because if you look at the technology, it's really powerful. It can solve so many problems, but it's used for only a really, really small section of this. And if you think about why this is the case, in my opinion, the problem is that those who actually have the problem don't know how to solve it with virtual reality, or that you even can use it for that. And my favorite example is a use case, and it was implemented in the early 90s because someone solved a really important problem, and this is treating patients with severe burn wounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have burn wounds of degree 3 or 4, then you're in the hospital, and your skin basically is burned away, so it has to completely regrow. And this is very painful. And the problem there is that the, what's it called? You have to refresh the wound covers regularly. And basically every time you pull them off, you rip away the new skin.
The new skin, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's really painful. Yeah. And you have to do this over a long period because it really takes a long time. And so what you do is you give really, really strong painkillers. And even with those painkillers, the pain is unbearable. And what this person did is basically he just put a VR headset on the people's face while they were being treated, and the perceived pain went down by a huge factor. So he had 4 different metrics, and in some by 90%, by others only by 50%. But it was really a huge impact, which was better than basically the painkillers, with just putting a VR headset on your face. And as you can imagine, in the 90s, the quality that you can produce from the visual aspects and all other elements, it was really, really bad. And the VR headset, it was basically self-built because there was no standard hardware for that. So this guy built a VR headset, basically created a VR app with that technology at that time. The visual quality, basically what he created was an icy landscape, and there were snowmen, and there were just 3 spheres. So this is the quality that you had, right? And despite this quality, low quality of hardware and software and visuals, people said, hey, I see it is a code environment, right? And by just seeing the code environment, what the basically the brain does is when you rip off the skin, it says, oh, it's just cold, right? So the perceived, the pain is still the same, right? The sensors are still feeling the same pain, but your brain says, it's not that bad. Right? And this is really why I like this case, because it was only possible because this person was able to create the VR experience, the immersiveness, and understanding that, hey, if you put people in a cold environment perception, then they will feel less pain, right? And only because you had those 2 understandings and those skills combined in one person right now, right? Only because of that, he was able to do that. And if you now think about other use cases, it's really, really unique, this combination of those 2 different skills.
Right.
Because the VR developers usually are gamers. That's why you have so many VR games, and they are all great, or many of them are great. A lot of them are not that great. But we have VR gaming is basically covered and solved because the expertise is there. But for those things, like with pain treatment or other things, psychological sicknesses, or I think the opportunities out there are really huge, and we don't even know about them because we have to bring those skills together. This is the main motivation behind what we are doing at Mindport.
No, thanks for sharing, and that's indeed, quite an eye-opening or interesting kind of use case or example. Because, like you said, everywhere you look around, either there are some really niche cases that maybe you heard once, but everything circles around gaming in say on a higher level. But then that was, of course, or you seeing this kind of space or untapped potential as well is where also led you to the idea of creating VR Builder as well. Maybe you can elaborate a bit further on that.
Yeah, the basic idea behind VR Builder is that we have one platform where the VR developers and the non-programmers can collaborate on. Because if you look at how VR applications are created in a standard process, it's basically the one who has a subject matter expertise. They write then hundreds of pages of documentation, and this is not even exaggerated. So I've seen 104 pages, lots of pictures. They hand this to the developer. The developer looks at this, starts coding. 3 months later, they hand back a VR application, and the one who wrote the document says something like, yeah, I had something different in my mind, right? This is the standard approach. It's very expensive, and you don't get the value that it would be possible, because what basically has to happen is the subject matter expert has to bring all the subject matter expertise in the head of the VR developer, who then does everything on their own.
Right.
And in my opinion, what's much better is if the subject matter expert can put in the subject matter expertise into the project by themselves, and the VR developer puts the VR expertise in the projects by themselves, and there's a connection, and they can basically see what the other person is doing and understands it, because then also the subject matter experts gets a better understanding what is actually possible in VR and where are the limits and how can you improve things. So it's then you have suddenly very, very quick iterations, because you basically can say, hey, I made this quick prototype here. I just made this in 1 day. And as you can see, in step 3, I have this kind of interaction, but I need another one. And you suddenly have the same knowledge base, which otherwise you don't have.
Yeah, there I fully understand and get the point. And at the end, you enable this kind of co-creation process, and then allow both of them to be part of the process and see how the incremental improvements are coming to life, and then adjust as you go. Otherwise, like you said, you kind of put at risk wasting the time, and then there is a complete mismatch with what you
Absolutely.
ordered, right? If I look at or maybe if we look at how the development process has looked like, what did the very first prototype just also to bring it in perspective on how this journey looks like in terms of building a product for those listening in as well. How does the very first prototype for BR Builder look like versus where is it today right now?
So I think the main aspect of VR Builder is the visual authoring, because we are focusing right now on the training use case. Basically, training always follows a given procedure. So you have to do things in the right order and in the right way. And virtuality is really valuable. So we were looking at a use case where you have a very clear return on invest, so that also enterprises and businesses are willing to invest in this. And yeah, if you look at how trainers are creating training materials, they are actually they know how to model this process, because also if they create a web-based training, for instance, which many of them do already, it's always some kind of visual process editor behind that. And especially if you look at enterprises in the manufacturing, then the trainers are the subject matter experts. And they know how the machinery works. So they are often engineers, for instance. And for an engineer, just writing down the process in a structured way is very intuitive. So already the first prototype, it was basically just the visual editor, and you could create new steps. And in the first iteration, it was very linear. So it was just step 1, 2, 3. And now we have also different paths and loops and branches and parallel execution, and you can do all kind of fancy process stuff. But in first stages, it was just 1, 2, 3, and you could say what should happen in these steps.
Okay, understood. How important, or how are you integrating the feedback into the further development of what you're offering and into your roadmap? So how important is that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so we have a tricky challenge, because as you know, we have the non-developers and the developers, and both are user groups. So we have to build a product that suits both of them.
Both.
Yeah, and they provide feedback in very different forms. So
Can imagine.
Aligned with that, we also provide different entry points for giving us the feedback. And for the developers, for instance, we have this, our product is also open source. So we have this open source GitHub repository where you can natively also make pull requests and report bugs and request features. And this is where developers mainly provide their feedback.
Right.
And this is also nice, because sometimes they even just make a quick change and do a pull request, and we can just review and accept it. And then the product grows on its own. So including the direct improvements instantly. We also have a Discord community, developers, gamers, Discord, all the same, right? So we get lots of feedback there as well. But mainly from the developers then. And then, of course, we talk with our clients and partners. So with our offering, well, the base product you can use for free. But if you think about this, you want to an open source solution in an enterprise, there are many different challenges, and it might make sense that we support you with solving these challenges. So, for instance, giving product training, but also helping with IT and data privacy clearings, guiding on how to adopt the tool, helping with integrating with third-party systems in the IT infrastructure at the enterprise. All these things, they benefit from us supporting the clients. And so we usually do regular customer success meetings with them. And there we gain a lot of feedback from not only regarding the product, but also on a more strategic level about partnerships and integrations, for instance.
Okay, understood. Maybe also in the line of feedback, maybe even coming more from, but there, please correct me if I'm wrong, if it really plays a role. But for those that are not full into the developer mindset, I mentioned at the beginning that I was also myself, for example, using a ChatGPT to just give my most likely unstructured requirement and try to get some sort of first working version of something I was playing around with. In what you are bringing forward, which role do you see in terms of using AI, generative tools, etc., in the experience that you're offering in terms of accessibility, making things easier for the users?
If you look at the full picture of immersive experiences, right? It's always some kind of 3D environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you want to not have a static environment, but you want to have it interactive.
Right.
So these are basically the two main areas, the 3D creation and then the interaction design and then the logic behind it. And what VR Builder does is it helps to provide the interaction and create immersiveness to a static environment. And the question is still, where does the 3D come from?
Mm-hmm.
And we did not tackle this in the past because basically there are already standard solutions for it. There are shops where you can get them. This, for instance, the Unity Asset Store. It's a huge library of 3D assets that you can use, and many of them are even free. There are other sources for that, and if you need a very specific one, then you can go through a 3D artist. They provide their services, and if you think about enterprises, they usually have many of their models also in computer-aided design, so CAD data just needs to be transformed to be usable in VR with the right poly code and format. But there are standard solutions for that. And still, it takes at least 50% of the time to get 3D models ready.
Right.
For post-processing, etc. And I think this is something where AI can do a lot. And if you think about generative AI, it already is very good at generating 2D images and videos, and it gets better every day. And with 3D, it was struggling for a long time, but even there, it's now making some advancements. So I think the 3D modeling aspect is something that will probably be possible to at least take the load of 3D modelers by a lot. I think they still have to be involved in some way and do some kind of optimizations manually because they understand what's happening there. But I think AI will accelerate their work by a lot. Second thing is you don't want to have static 3D models.
Right.
So if you have a chair and a table, okay. But if you have humans, for instance, non-playable characters walking around, interacting with you, you want them to move around and you usually have something very specific in mind. And this is also something that right now is not solved. If you want to have avatars moving around, showing real emotions, this very soon gets uncanny. And there are basically two options. Either you go with low quality or it's directly costing a lot because then a 3D artist has to work on this for 3 months and then you have a small animation clip out of this. And this is actually something that we are working on now with a university in a research project, that you can work with text prompt and other input forms to generate those animations. So this is another element. And coming to the interactions, as mentioned, we can right now define it by a visual editor, by defining the process. But actually, if you could just explain something to an AI and this creates a process for you, this would, of course, be more comfortable for many people who maybe don't have this technical background.
Right.
Or even better, if you say, hey, here's my handbook, make the training, right? And everything happens magically. So these are things that we are looking into. And in addition, you can also integrate AI in the immersive experience. So if you think about, you have a multi-user scenario, so several people collaborating on a task, but maybe some of those jobs are actually pretty boring and you don't want to have a person always in VR doing the boring stuff and you want to replace it, can you just put an AI in there and cover this aspect of the role for you? So there are many aspects where AI actually has a huge impact on not only our technology and product and use cases, but actually on immersive experiences. And this is, I think, also one of the reasons why many XR enthusiasts say there's a very important connection between AI and XR because of those huge synergies that really push the limits here.
No, thanks a lot for elaborating on that. And I think that I mentioned you already shared quite interesting points, and you will continue then leveraging this technology to also enhance ultimately where you're offering also to your customers, to your partners, but maybe to transition and also being mindful of time. Ultimately, you are enabling companies through your service, and for that, you're also delivering a specific value to them. As a founder, how did you came to your business model? So, and let's say, is this something that you kind of found like a golden formula for that, or you regularly think about that? How does it work for you?
Maybe again, it was an opportunity. And the seed for this whole product was when working with one enterprise client while still at InnoActive. So at InnoActive, as mentioned, I was a product manager for the InnoActive Creator, and it was a completely new product. And it was helping enterprises scale via training. And the other question was also, hey, how do we scale this? And the idea was modular building blocks that then can be used for mass production. And the reason why they did not want to use one of the proprietary solutions out there, actually there are many, like also vendor lock-in and IT security, and they don't want to have it their process information in some weird cloud somewhere out there. But one of the elements was also that they had very specific kinds of interactions, right? And you cannot just build them in closed solutions. So they needed some kind of open system for it. And just for one example, this client, that was an assembly case, right? And they explained us, hey, we have 4 different ways on how to screw a screw. Now, tell me how many platforms provide 4 ways of screwing a screw. And there is none, right? And so this kind of flexibility that they really have their own processes, their own interactions, their own tools. And there was something like, in this station, I need the screwdriver to be red and in this one blue. And we were, why? Because it has some semantic input. So if you go as an assembler to this station and you see the blue one, you know, this is blue, so I have to do this one. So the color really tells them something without having to make this explicit. And this huge level of flexibility, this also explained why you cannot just remove the developers from the equation and say, hey, here's the tool for the non-developers, are the creators. And I see it's basically the same approach when creating websites. If you think about 20 years ago, how was a website created? Some coder created HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and then you had the full web page. And if you want to make a change, the developers went into code. And if you look about how this is done now, there are marketing experts who use website building systems where they just drag and drop building blocks and then they see what's happening. But when they come to something and say, hey, I need some very fancy animation here, it's not in the building blocks, then they go to the developer and they start coding. So this kind of collaboration, it's the same approach. And I think this is a solution also in the future on how to solve business problems with technology. It's always a collaborative approach that you have to take.
Okay, no, fully understood. Let's transition to something that when we got the chance to meet up front, I found also quite interesting. I mentioned that in the introduction as well, which is around the topic of culture and management within Mindport. And what it was quite interesting for me were themes like you are a, let's say, fully remote-based company. I took the note of the topics of valuing fairness, honesty, transparency. How important are these values to you? Why are they so important? And also within the context of a startup as well.
So yes, they are very important. Hard for me to answer on the spot why they are important. I think this is mainly a personal driver. I mean, basically, if you think about values and you ask a company, hey, what are your company values? And they list some kind of fancy buzzwords, right?
Right.
I think this is not culture or values. Basically, a value is something that you stick to even if it's hurt. So this is how I frame it, right? Imagine you go out there and there's someone doing something wrong. Do you interact or intervene, even though you risk being punched in the face, or do you just pass by, right? So taking a risk just because it's right or feels right to you, this is what a value is. And I mean, if you are a company and you have values, this is the same, right? Would you lose business for the sake of sticking to this value? This is basically what the value should be. And for me is, well, in some cases, you could win a client, or you can tell them, hey, to be honest, actually, there's a better way for you without us, right? And many would go for this, maximizing their business.
Right.
But this is not how I want to do business. And it might be not sustainable in the long run. I hope it will be, because in my opinion, if you do it and be honest, then maybe you lose this client one day, but they come back or recommend you to another person. So I think this is actually also beneficial. But in this spot, I would just do it because it feels right. And the same is also for employees. I don't want to manipulate or motivate someone externally for some reasons. I'm trying to generate basically equally beneficial situations. So I ask, hey, where do you want to go? How can the company help you achieve your personal goals? How can you help achieve the company goals? And either there is synergy and then we both benefit, or there is not, and then we might even have
Part
to
ways.
depart, right? But I would not try to lock anyone in and maximize the profit for those reasons. I just don't think this is fair.
Yeah, no, I appreciate being open, and speaks a lot about yourself also on how you're bringing or trying to bring this towards your customers, but also most important part of the company as well, which is all the people you're working with, the employees, which are ultimately the engine together with you to make things happen as well. But that's why also I found interesting, and I was trying to look around these kind of management 3.0 approaches and so on. When we discussed, you mentioned this aspect of giving employees voting rights on decisions. Maybe can you explain a bit more, because that's not usual. So that's kind of that's not the usual approach. And I mean, we were also shortly discussing for those listening in, like how these kind of approaches where hierarchies, decisions on salaries and so on works on large corporations. And that's what I was quite interested on some of your points. Maybe you can share, David, some around that.
Yeah, I can try. Well, I think most people who work in an enterprise or even in smaller companies, they will at some point hit a spot and say, hey, it doesn't really make sense like that, but we still do it like that, right? So you're doing this something just because we ever did this like that, or management decided, or whatever. The reason why it is like that is because management that we are applying today comes from a different time and environment. Right. So the currently mostly adopted management techniques were from a time where, for instance, we did not have robots, but actually people, right? And then we had the assembly line. And for an assembly line to work, there was control needed, and management had understanding of the process, and the people were just doing their part and trying to do their part in the best way, right? And they did not have to understand anything else. So they were most efficient if they would just do exactly what they have been told and exactly the way they have been told. And basically they were the robots back then, right? And they wanted to have a robot that just works. And back then it was the perfect way on how to manage your company. And if you look at companies today, since robots took all the repetitive tasks, and if you now think about AI, can also take a lot of also intellectual repetitive tasks.
Right.
Staying is knowledge work and creativity and these things. And you cannot manage this. You cannot manage creativity. You can create an environment for people to be creative and to be able to use this creativity to generate value. And these environments have to be very different. Actually, the current adopted management techniques are harming these new way on how to generate value. And this has already been measured and proven. So there is lots of research about this already. And there are some few companies who try to be different and who are successful at being different. So very simple questions. If it's better, why doesn't not everyone do it? And in my opinion, the reason for that is it's very hard to transition from the old way to the new way. Maybe it's even impossible. And if it's really impossible, then how do we get there? Basically, new companies start from scratch, grow up, and be productive of this new way of working to not adopt the old management way. If they manage to do that, then they will be in a leading position, because suddenly they can benefit from the most valuable thing in their company, which is the creativity of their employees. So, and my ambition as a founder was, hey, we have a cool product, we have a cool company. There's a growing need in the market. And from what we are doing here right now with our little product, it can grow. And if you think about the future is 3D internet, if we grow in this area, right, we could even be the next Google. And when we are there in the future, I want to be in this position where we have this great new way of managing. So this was why I, from the start on, said, I don't want to do the classical management. This is also one of the main benefits from a startup compared to larger companies, because it's not about resources. The larger companies have much more money.
Right.
But why are startups still needed? Because they are faster and they can break things. So this is what you bring as a value, actually. So this I want to maintain even if we grow. And startups, they can grow very fast, and then the standard patterns happen, and suddenly you add new layers of management, and suddenly you have bureaucracy everywhere. And I think you have to really be very cautious directly at the start to have a culture of self-management, to not get bureaucratic.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for sharing all of that. Maybe just one additional point on that. How let's say you try to bring this within the company, and then I fully agree that the bigger the corporation it is, the more rigid the structure is. But if you have this starting playing ground within the startup point of view, how has this been taken up also from the different team members at Mindport at the moment? Do you think that it's also a process to be able to say and accept that there are other options on how you can actually deal with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe you can elaborate a bit on how even the team embraces that.
So it's not that we can just go and don't manage, right? We need management.
Right.
And if you say you want to have a team that's self-managed, what sometimes people try is they just go from, okay, I have been micromanaging before, I now stop managing and I expect my team now to be self-managing. And of course that doesn't work, right? Because
Right.
they have no training, they don't know the constraints, they have no practice. They have to first find their way, and there's first a storming phase, right? So everything's chaotic, and usually while it's chaotic, they already say, okay, it doesn't work, and they stop this. Self-managing teams, that means that the team already has the skills to self-manage, and this is not a simple task.
Right.
But I believe that everyone is basically a manager. If you plan a vacation, you are basically managing. This is a project that you are doing there. So everyone is doing this on a daily basis. Just doing groceries is a very little project, but it's project management. You do a plan, you have a time, you have a budget, you have a goal, right? You want to have, and the final goal is you have some food on the table, and ideally it's healthy and tastes good. And if you screw up your purchase, then of course it's not going to happen. So it's people manage all the time. So I think the thing is, if you have now a team, you have to support the team to self-manage. And then there are different roles that have to be understood and practiced. And so it's also a lot about communication. And this has to be facilitated. So creating this environment for this to happen is quite a tough challenge, to be honest.
Yeah.
And some people like this more, some people need longer, some really enjoy it, some strive in this environment, some are not willing to take responsibility. That's sometimes also the case. And since you also brought it up, we have a remote only company. I think it's the same. Many people like this, and they say, hey, there are so many advantages of it that I want to work completely remote. But others say, I miss going to work. I'm always sitting alone in front of my PC, and I get depressed by that. And of course, it's not that this is the perfect solution for everyone. Definitely not. But for the employees that work at Mindport, it's working great.
Yeah, and I think at the end, as I mentioned before, you have this environment in which you can, in a smaller group, start trying to bring new ideas, shaping. Everybody can grow through it, and then of course you're adjusting as you go forward, based on what it feels right, not only for you but the team as a whole. But I can also understand that it's a process. It's a process to get there, and it's a ultimately change management as well that you need to journey that you need to deal with the different team members. I wanted to also touch base on, and I mean, I have now established this tradition on the podcast that I'm asking the previous guest to leave a question for the upcoming guest. And from the previous guest, there was one question related to funding and how this topic is taken up when you're engaging on a startup. And the question was around, how did funding actually work for you, and how is this actually being tackled within the company? And maybe I let you answer first, and I add the follow-up question.
Okay. Yeah. Can I give a longer answer? I think it requires a longer answer.
You can give it a long answer.
So, I mean, if you think about startups, right, and you go to the accelerators, incubators, whatnot, right, and you watch the Lions Den, or listen to everything that's shown about startups in the media, you get an impression on how startups should work. And I would like to call this now the American way. So if you are thinking about startups, it's always like this. right? You do those pitches, you get the VC funding, you put the money in there, you grow fast or you fail, right? So it's always like that. And I was basically playing this game, and I think we were quite successful actually. So we had this cool startup, right? Innovative product, modern technology. At that time, actually, like 1 or 2 years after we founded Mindport, there was this metaverse hype. So quite on the spot. We had the product at the MVP after 3 months on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, some investors approached us and said, hey, do you need funding? And we said, yeah, maybe we are too early, right? We don't have that much revenue yet. And they say, no problem. We even invest pre-revenue. So I said, okay, let's talk about this, right? And then reality hit. So the same VCs that said they invest pre-revenues, they said we don't have enough revenue.
Right.
So there were really weird answers why they were rejecting us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you also told is make your list of potential VCs and rate them. Yeah, and the tier A, this is the one that you actually want to get investment from because they are the perfect fit. You approach them last. You have to first practice, right? So you first reach out to all the others, get their rejections, understand, learn, improve.
Mm-hmm.
So we did all that, right? And even though we had a working product, market confirmation, even enterprises like Volkswagen and Deloitte, right? Even known brands. We had a good team. We had growing revenues, right? We had everything. And we just said, hey, we don't even need that much money. We need only 250,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not much. No interest at all.
Mm-hmm.
And rejected by really weird reasons like your revenues are not enough, but even we invest without revenues, or you are a solo founder. We don't invest in solo founders for not rational reasons because it has been proven that they are even more successful if you look at the data. But someone does it like that, so everyone does it like that. So it's really, really weird. And yeah, we went to a place where we did just get rejected, and we had to accept it's not going to be better because then there was after the hype there was a metaverse crash. So the topic of VR was completely dead, not investable anymore. Also, the market stagnated, so we also could not show a hockey stick curve anymore. So we said, okay, this is not going to work. We will not get any funding, and even if we would get funding, it's not going to end well. And yeah, that was maybe also lucky because from previous connections, we applied for a research project and we actually got this. So this was really good because it covered some of the costs and there were synergetic effects between this research project and our product development. So we really could benefit, and this covers a lot of our costs. So we did this, and since this worked well, we applied for some more research projects with expectation, hey, maybe one of them goes through. And then all of them went through. And that's when suddenly we had 4 research projects and not even the resources. So I had to hire someone new. And this is now what I would like to call the European approach of startup. Because if you now look at America, right, and Silicon Valley, there are lots of business angels because they got a lot of money because they worked at Google in the early days. Right? So they made a lot of money, they love technology, they don't know what to do with the money, and so they invest in startups and do this, right? And this leads to new startups, new exits, new unicorns, new business angels. So there's this huge ecosystem which support this, and also this way, and also this winner takes all approach. In Germany, there are much fewer business angels, and they often also don't come from a huge exit from a high-tech company. So there are often successful managers, for instance. And this is also why many of them tend to be more, well, despite they call themselves VC, so venture capital, they want to only make safe bets. So this is already the first weird thing about the business angels and the VCs. And the VCs often have some kind of state involvement. So some of the money comes from the state. So there's also some kind of, we want to have some security.
Right.
And this means that they are reluctant to invest in really those big shots things here in Germany especially. But what we have is, and I think it's also reflected in the history of Germany, we have this German Mittelstand, right? So small companies, no one knows about them, but they are the market leader in the very niche. And this is an ecosystem which works completely different. It's not the winner takes all. It's about collaborating, about networking effects. And Europe also tries to support this innovation by also supporting this ecosystem. And they also try to ensure that European values are implemented. So, for instance, gender equality and other aspects. And this is always reflected in the research grants and applications. So you have to also consider what I'm doing here is not just a good business opportunity and an interesting research aspect, but it also helps our society as a whole. Yeah, I think if you are a founder in Germany or Europe, you should understand that it's not like in the American media here. You can get VCs, you can get business angels, but they think and act differently. And one aspect is that is also not the only way of funding. You can get lots of grants and subsidies here, which will help you, and you should know them and use them, because if you don't, you really have just a bad hand. You are competing against others. And one very important thing is also, if you as a German startup want to compete against an American startup on their playing field, then you will lose. Because for them it's much easier to really get a lot of money, and then they can crush you with a lot of money if you're trying to play their game.
Sure.
And at the same time, here in Germany, you have lots of regulations and bureaucracy and also additional costs. Right? Even if you think about how much you have to pay to the notary in case of an exit, that's really a bummer, because this will come from your exit. So I would actually say, if you want to play the American startup game, you should go to America. But you can play a European startup game in Europe, but it's different. You should know it. And yeah, for us, it took a long time to learn this, but now we understood it, and now we are very successful in this way.
No, thank you very much for elaborating on that. And I think it's really, really insightful, because, as mentioned, I'm well aware that many people also listening in are either exploring or maybe are on the journey that you already went through, and even assessing this important. It's one of many cornerstones on the startup process. But thanks a lot for laying out your opinion and view, fully building on your experience on that one. So I appreciate that. Yes, wanted to round up maybe, again, looking at the time, with just a couple of final thoughts. Looking into Mindport, looking into what you're doing on VR Builder, where are you headed to? What are kind of the next bigger milestones you want to achieve looking into the future?
So the short-term goals are, of course, finishing our projects, and then I have some more time and capacity to think ahead. One of the projects was about surgery. So we are basically helping aspiring surgeons to gain fine motor skills, so that they don't have to basically practice on the real patients. I think this is a huge topic. So if the research is going well, I see there's a new product in there. We already talked about the AI systems and how they impact our business, and we are already working on these. So yeah, the presentation on Monday that I already mentioned, this is about a speech AI that we integrated in our system. So you can use it for also multi-user scenarios or to bridge the language barrier. I think this is also something very valuable in many use cases. But then we have this generative AI, as mentioned, the 3D modeling and especially the animating part is right now one of the biggest financial barriers that you have to overcome. So I think this is also something that we will tackle in the longer future. And if you really look ahead, the picture gets fuzzy, but I think the vision is clear. The creation will become more natural and easier for everyone. And I don't expect that we will be looking at 2D screens for a long time. So I think we will get rid of PC screens and mobile phones, and we will be wearing smart glasses, and we will experience a complete digital 3D layer on the 3D real world with lots of implications that come from that. And I think it's going to really be a mixed reality. So it's not only that we will see digital overlays, but actually that interacting with the digital will influence the reality. And we already see something like that. I mean, you can talk to Alexa and say, hey, dim the lights, and the lights change, right? This is basically from digital to reality. And you can order food, and in the future, the food will just appear in your fridge, right? So these things will change. They will also have severe risks for society, because it can really mess up your perception of reality. If you start believing the wrong and false things. And we already see how this happens on 2D screens. It's going to be even harder on 3D screens, especially if the visual quality will be more convincing. And at some point, we will probably just put a cable into our brain and be there, whatever this is. Those things are all going to happen. And What I would hope for this future is that all this technology potential is used for the benefit of the people and be used by the people, and not as a tool to manipulate and to steer whole societies for the sake of single persons.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective. As I mentioned up front, so one of the main purposes of why I personally appreciate engaging on these discussions and having new perspectives is indeed kind of these points of me seeing or hearing from you being on the topic of what you're working on to understand the potential beyond what I was always having in mind. But at the same time, I think you also make a really important point based on the potential you see moving forward, that this is managed also in the right way, because there's also chances that it can derail if it's not falling in the right hands. So yeah,
There's really high risk, yeah.
thank you very much for sharing that on that, David. Maybe just one final question, and by the way, feel free to take a bit time if it's needed. I'm also gonna cut it. Just to round up, I wanted to ask you to continue that tradition. What question would you like to leave for our next guest?
Well, since we talked about the values and culture and maybe also modern management techniques, I would be interested in how others are doing this. So, how important is values and culture to you, and what actions do you take to foster culture and implement values?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, maybe as a second question regarding the management, if there are also some forms of how is everything managed and how is also the management related to these cultural aspects?
All right. Thank you very much. If anybody would like to, and I said we have, I would say, diverse audience. If anybody would like to learn a bit more what you guys are doing, where can they find about Mindport?
Yeah, of course, you can visit our website. We also sometimes are at events and trade fairs. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, for instance, you can see what we are doing there. You can also just reach out to me, have a chat. And as mentioned, our product is also free and open source. I think it's also very valuable for everyone to learn about VR. So if you say, hey, this is interesting and you are curious, and even if you're not a programmer, if you have some technical skills, this is totally a tool for you. So you can just start getting into this, learn a lot of stuff, maybe find new use cases from your primary expertise and say, hey, actually, the problem that I had all these years, I could solve it with extended reality. And then we start a business together or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really welcome everyone to get into the VR creation part. I think it's a valuable skill for the future, because it's really you need the understanding and cover different areas to generate new value.
Thanks a lot, David, for sharing all your thoughts, experiences, insights. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm really happy that you joined the podcast, and I trust that all those listening in were also able to get quite some insights in the same way that I just did by talking to you. So thank you very much for joining, and thanks a lot for those watching the episode, listening in, tuning in, and see you in the next episode. Maybe some final words also from your side, David.
Thanks to you for having me. Thanks for inviting and approaching me in the first place. And of course, thanks to all the listeners listening to me talk about the different topics. And I hope it was interesting for everyone.
Great. I trust it was indeed the case. So thanks again for your time, David. And thank you for those listening in. See you all in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed the conversation, I would really appreciate your support. So depending where you're listening to it, don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast and leave any questions or comments. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you in the next episode.